A speech sound disorder is when a child is unable to produce correct sounds or put sounds together by a certain age. So every age is kind of like a benchmark, and if a child does not reach that benchmark by that certain age, then it's considered a disorder. Before then, it might just be a delay, so they might get that sound or put the sounds together a little bit later than the rest of their peers, and that's just a delay, but if it's significant, it can become a disorder. The benchmark age range is pretty wide because each child is different, but just so that you have kind of a range to be able to watch when your child is supposed to start doing something, they give you an age range. For example, one of the benchmarks is from 10 to 15 months. So there's a 5-month difference that children could start producing a sound or saying a certain word, but it would not become a disorder until much later. Milestones are there, or benchmarks are there to be able to track development and be able to catch delays so that interventions and speech therapies can be implemented early. Testing for speech disorders begins with listening to the child. Sounds kind of simple, but someone that's very qualified, like a speech language pathologist or an SLP, can be able to point out not only is that sound incorrect, but also is the teeth placement, is the tongue placement, or the lip placement when saying that certain sound, is that correct or is it appropriate for that age range? As for personally, many of my caseload this past year, I had 4th graders, and many of my caseload was made up of kids with speech services. So I worked very, very closely with the SLPs at my school, and when we were writing an IEP, we would kind of collaborate back and forth, and we both had access to everything, so we could talk back and forth, and they could put their input. They were in all of my meetings. It was actually a requirement that they were. So I worked very closely with the SLPs and learned a lot this past year. A few of my students even graduated from speech services with the help of the therapies that they had been getting from kindergarten up until then, 4th grade. Of course, their parents had to sign off on it and say that that was okay for them to end the therapies. But I had a few of mine that did graduate. For how it might affect a student with having a speech sound disorder, parental consent or guardian consent can become an issue, or what we call a roadblock. So in order to provide services or therapies to that student, we have to have guardian consent, written consent, for us to be able to move forward or even test for a speech disorder, especially a sound speech disorder. We cannot move forward without that. So this past year, one of my students, there was definitely a special case where the state ended up stepping in and was able to give consent after 4 or 5 months of being unable to get the parent to respond and give consent for us to help a child that desperately needed help. So once they stepped in, they were able to give us the consent that was needed to move forward with the testing and move forward with the actual services being put in place.